Thank you very much. Your Highness, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. And if I could also invite my panellists to come up on the stage while I make a few short introductory remarks. If you'd like to welcome them up as they come. Jim Albaugh, who's CEO of Boeing Commercial Aeroplanes, is coming up now. Welcome, Jim. Marwan Lahoud, who's Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer at EADS. Marwan, welcome. Giuseppe Orsi, who's CEO of Finmeccanica. David Hess, President Pratt and Whitney. He's on his way. Welcome, David. Akbar, who's CEO of Qatar Airways. And finally, but not least, Homaid Shemmari, who's Executive Director of Mubadala Aerospace. Welcome, gentlemen. Please take a seat. I'm just going to make a few introductory remarks and then we'll be straight into a Q&A. There's an expression you hear quite frequently in the telecommunications business. This is a business which has undergone enormous change over the last couple of decades. The word is disruption. Disruption in telcos is something they've become used to dealing with. Mobile technology, they're now confronted by Google, by Facebook, by the whole range of social media which are intruding into their area. That disruption is both against the incumbents, but it's also occurring by the incumbents as a response to that disruptive process. And this is a process that's usually seen as healthy. It's a competitive process, it leads to evolution of the industry, and it also leads to consumer innovation, which generally means lower prices and more effective products. In aviation, what is happening in what is probably the most important 5 years in its history right now, a very important window for us, is disruption. But it's almost entirely disruption against the incumbents. And rather than those incumbents responding by being disruptive, most of the incumbents are in fact trying to protect the status quo. And that is a big difference in this industry, contrasted, for example, with the telcos. And it's not all their fault, because they are trapped in a very stupid regulatory system which prevents them from being much more efficient and global. This is based on bilateral agreements which are often restrictive. The whole purpose of having bilateral agreements is to be restrictive, and national ownership restrictions which prevents them from being global, international. You probably saw that Sony just announced they were going to reduce their staff numbers by 10,000 worldwide. There's no airline that can do that because they don't have staff worldwide. They have all their staff at their national territory. They're not global. They're small and they're national, and therefore they're uncompetitive and unable to respond. But the key thing I want to address here in this disruptive process is why there is going to be disruption. There is going to be disruption because Asia is disruptive, because the Middle East is disruptive. As we move into this second decade of the 21st century, Asian airlines are growing very fast. We know that. The market is enormous. But Asian low-cost carriers, and this is a breed that until 10 years ago did not even exist, Asian low-cost carriers alone have orders for 1,000 aircraft currently on their books. And that means a whole lot more engines as well, of course. There's an impatience for change. They want progress. China alone is going to be ordering 300 aircraft at least a year for the foreseeable future. The Middle East has 400, airlines have 400 wide-body aircraft on order. 400 wide-body aircraft on order. And when we talk about the Middle East, we're talking about a very small number of airlines. Asia Pacific has over 1,200, 1,200 wide-body long-haul aircraft on order. The US has 200. Europe has less than 400. And those numbers alone show you there's a disruptive process going on. And not only is that process occurring at the metal end of the business, because this business is not just about flying aeroplanes. It's about selling. It's about making money, or as Tony just suggested, not making money. Those two sources of disruption are reshaping the world. But watch what's going to happen with Google, with Facebook, even Apple. These are a whole new part of the business which are starting to pay much greater attention to the 3 billion passengers who pass through airlines each year, and over which those airlines mostly are very careless in terms of their knowledge and understanding and their care for them. There are some very hungry people out there who'd rather be selling the product than the airlines. Then finally, of course, we have a few little issues like fuel prices, environmental pressures, and that lack of profits. The bottom line I'd like to stress before, as we go into this process, is we are in a window and on the threshold of enormous change. There's going to be a very different world in 10 years' time. That's what I think. Let's hear what our panel think. And Jim, maybe if I could get you to kick off by asking you what you see as the industry's greatest challenges, current and future, and how do you go about addressing them? I'd like you to do that in 30 seconds. Not seriously.
I think in terms of the challenges, they're pretty clear. It's the world economic situation. It's certainly the price of fuel. It's the regulatory issues that we face, I think in particular, the environmental issues that we're going to have to face up to. But I think there's solutions to all of those. And quite frankly, I think there are plenty of opportunities as well in this industry.
That's a nice positive start. There are opportunities indeed. Marwan, are we ready to face this growth that we're looking at? Is it all opportunities, or from a manufacturer's point of view, what do you see as the big issues?
Adding to what Jim said, I mean, fuel price is obviously a challenge for the industry as a whole and the economic environment as well. But if I focus on the manufacturer point of view, we have to cope with an increasing demand worldwide. We need to focus on our forces to be able to produce, to increase the rates, and adding on the environmental side, our industry is very environment friendly. 45% increase in the number of aircrafts over the last 2 decades, and 3% increase of the emissions, which shows how focused we are on that. We're lucky because reducing the emissions goes in the same direction as improving efficiency and economic efficiency. This is not the case of all industries. In a nutshell, we need to be able to deliver aircrafts, to increase our rates, and we rely on that on our supply chain. The heroes are the supply chain, not the two of us, because they have to supply both of us and respond to the overall demand.
Thank you very much. Jim, sorry, I wasn't serious about that 30 seconds. I'll come back to you on that.
Yeah, a lot more material, Peter. Really did.
I figured. It's rather a big topic. Giuseppe, you have a slightly different position in the market. How do you see the big challenges and the opportunities?
Well, I see the challenges are many, already mentioned. I think, though, there are a lot of opportunity out there that we should exploit. I think new technologies for new aircraft, are we going to go back to Mach 2? I don't think so. Are we going to better utilize what we have? I was listening before that Heathrow has blocked the runway. I think that we need to think as something new, such as to use more the vertical dimension, how to get out from crowded space. I believe that the vertical takeoff technology may be one answer just to get to reduce the need of airports and to reduce the needs possibly of runways, if we think that we can go into the airport in different way, mainly considering what the big progress we are doing in the ATM, I think that can be a solution that is not far from us.
Thank you, Giuseppe. David, from your end of the business, the pressure is really on now to gain greater efficiencies. It's the engine that burns all this obnoxious material. You've got to make an enormous amount of investment on your side of the picture with a very long time frame and with the prospect of making a lot of mistakes along the way. How good is that?
I think the good news is, from the perspective of Pratt & Whitney and the engine manufacturers, we're well on our way to making that investment. I mean, we've been spending more than $1 billion over the last 20 years to develop what we would consider to be the next major leap or innovation in engine technology with the geared architecture, the geared turbofan. So we see an opportunity to address some of the concerns that Jim and others have touched on today, the challenge in terms of the cost of fuel, the impact that has on profitability of the airlines. You heard some of the startling statistics that Tony Tyler talked about, the fact that even though this is a spectacular industry representing about 19% of the world GDP, the truth is the profit margins for the industry on a whole are less than 1%, razor thin. So the only way we can address that challenge, as well as some of the challenges associated with environmental issues and sustainability, was continuing to innovate in terms of engine technology. And I think the best evidence that we're going to continue to do that is just look at history for the industry. If you look at the performance of the engine companies, and certainly Pratt doesn't have a monopoly on this, but we've been leading the way, I think, in terms of innovation. But if you look at the performance of Pratt over the last 50 years, from 1960 roughly, when we had the JT3 flying on Boeing 707s, to 2010, our fuel burn improvement is on the order of about 75%. So with that 75% fuel burn benefit, you get a percent also reduction, 4% reduction in carbon emissions. They go hand in hand. So I think if you look at the history of the industry, it's just remarkable in terms of the fuel burn improvements that we've driven. And not because of regulations or some of the carbon emission trading schemes that are being talked about in the EU right now or worldwide. It's because of the financial incentive that the industry has to drive improvements in fuel burn costs. The byproduct of all that is the improvement that we get in environmental performance. And there's nothing that's going to change that paradigm going forward. We don't need additional regulation, taxation, or any punitive measures with respect to carbon trading schemes. We're going to continue that path, and we're doing it today. I talked about the investment we've made in our new geared architecture, the 75% fuel burn improvement through 2010. Well, the engines that are on the drawing board today for Pratt that we're working on, that will eventually go on my customer to the left on his new Neo aircraft, will have 16% fuel burn benefit on top of that. And we're going to continue to innovate because we need to in order to be a competitive engine business. And it's not just fuel burn. If we look at the other ways that we add value to operators, is through maintenance cost. Look at the maintenance cost, and again, some of the early jet engines that we had on some of the early jets in the 1960s, mean time between a major shop overhaul was on the order of about 1,200 hours. Our new engines, mean time between a major shop overhaul is 10 times that, more than 10 times that, more than 12,000 hours. And I'm sure, again, my customer to my left here will expect more than that when he gets geared turbofan engines on his new Neos. So we have, the only thing you need to look at to get a comfort level that we're going to continue to innovate to address some of the challenges that have been talked about here is just look at the history of the industry. Again, we don't need trading schemes. We don't need punitive tax measures. There's other things that the governments could do with their money to further help some of the sustainability or environmental issues, such as I think others have talked about, modernization of the air traffic control system. That would have immediate benefit to the carbon footprint of this industry. And in a much shorter time than it would take for the airlines to recapitalize with new, more fuel-efficient aircraft. You would get an immediate benefit across the globe, in the US, in Europe, and elsewhere, from just modernizing the air traffic control system would be a much better use of the money than, again, some of the other things that are being talked about today. So from my perspective, from the perspective of the engine companies, and I think the industry, I think we're up to the challenge.
Indeed, and let's see the government's investing something in this process, as Tony hinted at before. Akbar, if you indulge me, I might leave you till last because you're the only one who actually consumes all these products that are being talked about, if that's okay with you. Homaid, you're as Mubadala, a major investor in this industry, and you've heard what some of these key suppliers have been talking about. What are your feelings on the big issues, the big challenges, the big opportunities for the aviation industry overall?
Challenges are quite immense for the industry, all aspects. I think we have multiple challenges. This is a very vulnerable industry, unfortunately, to a lot of effects that really do not involve us in the industry itself. Being part of a disruptive region, as you called it earlier, I think we're trying to challenge the status quo of the industry. And I think this is where we can add value and we can provide solutions for this industry. The old way of doing business is just not going to work anymore. The shift is going eastward. The purchasing power is moving away from the traditional regions. And I think the industry has to follow with that. Creating different models of doing business, creating a different model of supply chain for the OEMs is, I think, the solution for the future. Be it the customer requirements or the industry, profit and loss at the end of the day. I think this is where we have to target that. This industry requires a lot of capital, but unfortunately the returns are not as lucrative as probably other sectors and other industries. And this is where we have to address that issue for us, because for us to be sustainable, we have to change that model. We have to address that challenge. We're always going to have the volcanoes, we're always going to have the tsunamis, we're always going to have the oil prices. But if we collectively get together, all across the value chain of this industry, we will definitely find solutions to address those issues. And I think this is where I don't think till date the big players are moving into that leadership position to create that cohesiveness within the industry. And I'm hoping that such a conference will help address some of those issues.
Yeah, interesting perspective, and from an increasingly important investor like yourselves, that's an interesting place to be. Now, Akbar, you've heard how hard all these gentlemen are trying to make your life easier. What do you see as your biggest challenges and opportunities for the next, say, decade?
Well, I think Tony already mentioned in the beginning that there is a huge potential and there is a growth market in our region. Our region is the only area which is really showing a very healthy growth in aviation. So there is a huge opportunity for us, and you can already see that there is airlines in the region that are very successful and are envy of the industry. However, there are challenges to us, and one of them, of course, already mentioned, is the fuel price. But that is not alone. There is a challenge where airport charges are being increased at a time when the airline industry is struggling. There are delays in the delivery of products so that we can achieve the growth that we have planned. Both my colleagues that are sitting here have programs that are slipping. And to make even matters worse is now ETS, putting additional pressure on the airlines, even though this is unnecessary, because both GE and Pratt and Rolls-Royce are all producing efficient engines. As you could already hear, David did a very nice advertisement of his company. This ETS thing is going to be the most important thing in the future, especially for our Middle Eastern carriers, because we are carriers that will be penalized because we will be emitting more CO2 compared to our peers in Europe and other places, because we will be introducing more aircraft And of course, you were a bit off the mark by nearly 20 to 25%, because 3 airlines, Emirates, Qatar Airways, and Etihad together, have more than 500 wide-body aircraft orders. Coming back to the ETS, this is just, unfortunately, a cover-up for the inefficiencies of the European Union in the management of their finances. So this is, I think, only an indirect way of collecting more taxes, but I don't know what they will do with all this money. And to cover up the mismanagement they have been having in their finances for the last couple of decades. This is all coming up, and airline being such an important tool of economic development of all the countries, including the people who are green and who keep on making all these noises, but they keep on going on low-cost carriers. So in that case, I think these will be the challenges. One will be the charges, costs, and most importantly, delays in aircraft deliveries, which will stifle the growth opportunities that we have. And the Middle Eastern carriers, especially the Gulf carriers, are really bold enough to take the opportunity at this very difficult times in world economy to keep on growing. And I promise I will not teach anybody how to make airplanes.
Thank you very much, Akbar. Very interesting, contentious, and profound at the same time, as always. Jim, to pick up one of Akbar's last points there, and I won't pick up the one you think I'm going to pick up, but just this whole issue of being able to produce aircraft rapidly enough in a way which has now shifted in terms of region and in terms of type of aircraft that are needed. A much greater accent on larger aircraft today. Are the OEMs up to the task of being able to deliver, both in terms of operationally, technically, and in terms of actually getting the funding as commercial companies?
Yeah, let me go back to the challenges, if I could, and the challenge of the cost of oil. And certainly making more efficient airplanes is something we know we have to do for this industry. This is an industry that has lost money 6 out of the last 10 years. And the industry has to be healthy if the OEMs are going to be healthy. And building the efficient airplane is something that we are working on very hard, as is Airbus. You look at the A350 and 787, they're going to be 20% more efficient than the airplanes that they replace. We're both working hard on re-engineering the narrow-body airplanes, again, to make them more efficient, to help the airlines be able to make money and invest. Relative to being up to the task, clearly as we push technology, we find issues. They call them development programs because they've never been done before. And yes, some of these programs have taken longer than we'd hoped. But I think the result is precisely what the airlines need. Airplanes that can fly a long way with a good payload and do it much more efficiently than they could in the past. The challenges we face going up in rate. And it's not just Airbus and the Boeing company. It's also the new incumbents. It's Comac, it's Bombardier, it's Embraer, it's Lockheed Martin building the F-35. It's putting a huge strain on the supply chain. We source close to 1 billion parts a year, and I don't know how many parts from the rest of the industry are demanded, but certainly several billion there. So the supply chain, I think, is one of the fragile issues that we have to face into. And we have to make investment in the supply chain. We have to make sure that we give them good predictions on what the demands are going to be. And then we have to work with them on their people, their processes, their tools, and the systems to make sure that they can satisfy our demand. Relative to going forward, I think it's crucial that we listen to the customers to make sure that we get the airplane that they want. You go back to your early 2000s, we were looking very hard at 2 options. We were looking at a supersonic airplane, and we were looking at a very fuel-efficient airplane. And our customers told us what to do. People would not pay for speed, but they wanted was efficiency. And they wanted airplanes that would fly a long way from point to point. So I think the answer is I believe we're up to it. You know, not to discount the fact that these investment programs are very, very large, but they're also investment programs that pay dividends for decades to come.
Thanks, Jim. That issue about the supply chain is not one that we think about a lot, but obviously the more competitors in the market, the greater the demand for those different components. And there's only a limited number, I guess, of component manufacturers. Is that something that's fragmented between, say, Europe and North America? Do you tend to use the same supply chains?
I think if I sat down with Airbus and we compared the supply chains, you'd see an awful lot of commonality. There's also a lot of commonality between the commercial aerospace business and the defense aerospace business. And there is a finite number of suppliers. We've got 3 engine suppliers, certainly in the United States and Europe. We've got a number of avionics suppliers. There's probably not as much redundancy as there should be.
And from the European end, how do you see those sorts of issues that Jim's just been covering?
We're sharing, as I was saying earlier quickly, we're sharing more or less 60 to 70% of the same supply chain. And new entrants will be pulling on these resources as well. This is what makes the job hard. But commenting on a bit more on the delays, and maybe it's the engineers that sleeps deep inside me that leads me to say that we're not doing an easy job when we start developing an aircraft. There are many unknowns, many challenges that we're facing, and when we start, we believe it's going to work the way we design it. But most of the time, our program managers are managing bad news. They have a bunch of bad news in one hand and some opportunities on the other hand. And when we're building aircrafts that will last 20 to 30 years, the timeline is pretty much stretched when it comes to development. I understand fully what Akbar is saying about gross opportunities lost for the airlines, but one needs to take into account that on one side we're developing very risky stuff, and on the other side we need to close accounts on a yearly basis.
David, you're competing pretty much in that same supply chain, I guess, and delivering part of that supply chain. I mean, what sort of issues are you seeing there too? Is this as Jim suggested, a very fragile issue for the industry overall?
Challenges in our supply chain, I really don't see we've seen significant concern or risk yet, but it's something that we're looking at very closely. You know, now that we see rates going up, both at Boeing and Airbus and with our other customers, and again, Pratt is not the only one looking at that ramp up. Certainly, Rolls-Royce, GE, and other engine manufacturers are looking at similar ramp ups. And as Jim alluded to, we all go visit the same supply chain by and large. So it's an issue and it's a concern. It's something that we're spending a lot of time on today because quite honestly, if we look at 2015, 2016, we're looking at a significant ramp up in terms of engine deliveries for Pratt, not only on our commercial engines with the next generation product family of engines, but we're also seeing it in the military business with Joint Strike Fighters starting to ramp up. We're seeing it in our small engine business at Pratt Canada in terms of recovery of the business jet market and some new product introductions. So it's really across our business that we're seeing it. Good news again is that it's probably 2 or 3 years where we really start to encounter the more steep rates and we've got time to prepare. And we're doing that now. We're putting a lot of energy, focus, attention, talent into the operations organization and supply chain. We're in part the beneficiary of a huge ramp up we had to go through recently in our Pratt Canada business in Montreal. They went from delivering roughly 1,000 engines in 2003 to 4,000 engines in 2008, a fourfold increase in 5 years. We've now taken a lot of the people that were responsible for executing that ramp up and moved them into our large engine operations based in the U.S. to make sure that we take advantage of the lessons learned that they had from executing that ramp up. Sometimes it wasn't perfectly executed and flawless, but We learned a lot, and those same people are making sure that, you know, some of the stones we hit during that ramp up, we don't hit again during what's ahead of us at Pratt Whitney. So it is an issue. It's a concern, and we're spending a lot of time working on it to make sure that we can continue to deliver flawlessly to Finmeccanica, to Boeing, to Airbus, and to all of our other customers.
Akbar, you haven't always been totally sympathetic towards some of these problems that your suppliers have had. Do you see the opportunity for more cooperation between the consumers, i.e. the airlines, and the manufacturers at a time when obviously things are changing very dramatically?
I think you're wrong. I have never been sympathetic to anybody delaying supplying products to me. Well, I'm on the receiving end always. Unfortunately, as an airline, I'm not in control of the supply chain problems. But sometimes, yes, we are a little bit flexible, but our flexibility has limit. I, as an airline, I have my plans, and I have to stick to it, and I have to give the correct return on investment to the owners of my airline. So when these issues that manufacturers or aircraft producers are having in relation to the supply chain, of course, affects us some way or the other down the line. And we hope that keeping in mind that they have these supply chain deficiencies or problems, that they don't give us promises that they cannot deliver.
I'm sure they won't do that. Homaid, some of this has got to be good news for you, I guess, as an investor. I mean, what we're talking about here is lots of opportunities, right?
Well, definitely. We look at that with a lot of open eyes as opportunities to be captured. I think, you know, if you're in this industry, you understand how complex it is to build a new plane. This is not the easiest tasks. And a lot of people criticize this industry by saying, you've had a century of building planes, you should have got all of the problems out of the way. But it's not reality. You have new materials being introduced, new designs being introduced, a new way of integrating all of these aircrafts together. Today, you don't have Boeing or Airbus building 100% of a plane. This is all dependent on supply chain, on the design, on the integrated supply chain management of that plane coming up. Then you have customers as Akbar who are very challenging and very demanding, which is, of course, his right and his competitive edge. If you're competing like Akbar here in the Middle East with the likes of Emirates, Etihad, this is not an easy challenge. So when you commit your customers, your shareholders, to your expansion plans with a date, that is very, very difficult for the airlines to address and waive. And I think this is where we come as new investors, the Middle East, the Indians, the Chinese, into this industry where we say we can come up with creative solutions. We can come up with a different model of partnering. I think that's where we can add value, be it risk-sharing partners into serious programs, because we know that raising capital today is much, much more difficult for new programs. But also because we are also at the end of the receiving end of the products, we feel that there is a sense of requirement for the OEMs to appreciate that if we're going to be adding that value of purchasing all of those platforms, as you indicate some of the numbers, the procurement is happening at Asia and the Middle East. It's not happening in Europe and the US. I think there is a demand from our side to say we need our equivalent fair share of the industry participation. And I think once we get into that relationship, and I think within the UAE, we've been very fortunate to have partners such as Boeing, Airbus, and Finmeccanica to support us in those aspirations. And it has worked for us. But the challenge is how can we expand that to the rest of the world? I think that's where we need to manage and overhaul the supply chain, because it seems to be a very strong inhibitor for the growth of our industry.
I guess you're at the beginning, as an investor, you're at the beginning of a chain which ends with the airlines making, as Tony said before, 0.5% return on capital. They're the ones who've got to be profitable. Do you see an importance in change in the structural basis of the aviation industry? Is that something that you would militate for?
Well, I won't talk about the aviation industry. That's not my cup of tea. But I would challenge that, yes, the airlines would require and would need an investment, profits in their investment towards their investments, but that's across the value chain though. Why would you think the airline would require profit and Strata, for example, making composites wouldn't require profits, or EADS, Airbus, or Boeing wouldn't require profit? At the end of the day, all of us have to have returns on our investment. The trick is, how can we make that fair all across the value chain, and how can we make that a win-win situation for all of us? That is, I think, the equation where we have failed to achieve thus far.
Giuseppe, I want to come back to you. I skipped you intentionally as we were going across on that issue. I'd like to hear your views on it. But I'd also like to pick up something which was pretty radical that you said in your opening remarks about vertical takeoff and landing at airports. So can I first ask you to follow this point we were just talking about on the supply chain and funding of it, but also maybe if you could elaborate a little bit on this revolutionary idea.
Obviously, we have, as has been said before, we have in common a lot of the supply chain of the other manufacturer. What we are doing sometimes, we are trying to create mainly on a specific segment. So we are on both sides. We are part of the supply chain of Boeing and the EADS. By the same token, we are also benefiting of the supply chain of other as a supplier to us. I think seeing the things in both sides, yes, there is sometimes we are suffering for that, and we make we are making the other suffering as suppliers sometimes. But really, there is a big need of improving the supply chain. There is a big need of new processes, new facilities, and new capability, mainly in the new materials. But let me, if I may, I want to continue a little bit the thought. Let me go out of the box for a while. We in Finmeccanica, we have the experience of the regional aircraft, both propeller and jets. We have the experience of ATC. We have been working a lot on that, on new radar, new multilateralization, on the new techniques, and obviously on the vertical takeoff. So combining these three things, one thought is, while we are working really to think of the aircraft of the future, what is out of the normal scheme that we can do in order to increment the capability of the airport? The regional airplanes, the regional traffic is a bigger consumer of good slots, and I would say non-economically consumer of slots, because use the same slot that for 30, 40 passengers that you would use for 800 passengers, 600 passengers. And also listening to before with the limitations that are coming out. The night flight in Frankfurt, the third runway in Heathrow, the same is in Munich. Why don't we really develop something that allows us to increase the capacity of the airport by entering in different ways? Now, why the helicopter has not been successful so far? For many, many reasons. But today, helicopters are pretty well sophisticated to do some kind of traffic, even though it's commercial traffic, even though it's limited by the number of passengers and by the possibility you have in length of the distance. But let's consider instead the tilt rotor. Tilt rotor is already there. It's a technology that is existing. It's a technology that easily, I would say, and by the way, with the same order of magnitude that you should invest to have a much this low-consuming engine and all of that. Why don't we consider that as one of the possibilities? You can use the tilt rotor both for a point-to-point or for a feeder. On a point-to-point, you don't need a big infrastructure. You can go close to the city, and you can have a really, really reduced infrastructure. again, considering today the technology of the ATC, how you can really self-flight yourself to a single point. If you consider that as a feeder, then you can get into the airport with the same number of passengers that is the average number of passengers on the small commuter, and not using the slot and the runway, so using the space in a different way. This is something that I believe it can be a solution. We have, after debate, we have introduced this also in the Vision 2050 of Europe, and that is something we are really keen and we are working on.
I think it's important to look at a number of these other views, because if we think about it, I mean, there was no iPod, there was no iPad, there was no Facebook just over a decade ago. What's going to happen in the next couple of decades as we confront the issues in this industry are probably things we can't even imagine at the moment. So thinking outside the square is obviously an important part of that. We don't have a whole lot of time in this session, and I just want to skip around a little bit. I'm fortunate enough to live on the edge of the Asia-Pacific region. It's a very exciting place to be at the moment. But I think one of the issues we have here is this disruptive process I was talking about at the beginning, the whole disruption of the industry, whole disruption of our global economy. What we do still seem to have a very large overhang of what I'd probably call North Atlantic thinking and influence in the business. Is that something which is totally unjustified? I'm hoping you're going to say yes, Jim. And
I don't know if it's totally unjustified, but I think it's unjustified. I mean, we certainly understand, how the market's changing. If you go back 20 years, about 72% of the airplanes that we sold were in North America and Europe. You forecast out another 20 years, and it'll only be about 40% in North America and Europe. The rest will be other places around the world, and clearly where we see the biggest growth is Asia Pacific and right here. Our biggest customers are going to be the United States, will be China, and will be the UAE. And we know we have to adapt. We have to build the kind of airplanes that they want. We know that we have to partner in those countries. We need to be part of the fabric of those companies or those countries. And we've got to do things differently. So I really do believe that it's unjustified to say that we are very, I guess, Atlantic-centric. We are not. And I think we also are very aware of the demands that we're getting environmentally, not just here, but around the world. We know that we've got a responsibility to the world we live on and future generations to do things radically different and better than we have in the past. And it's not incremental improvement they're looking for, although we'll take that. We need radical improvements in the efficiency of airplanes and also dramatic reductions in their carbon footprints. And I think we can do that. And we're working very hard on lightweight materials. We're working very hard on improving the aerodynamics of the airplane. And I think the A350 and the 787 are two great examples of that. The engine manufacturers are stepping up and making engines that are much more efficient than they used to be. If one looks at the 707 versus the 787, we're about 70% more efficient right now than we were then. A huge, huge improvement. And I think the last two things that have to be addressed are biofuels and also air traffic management. I could go off on air traffic management for half an hour here. I'll prevent you from hearing about that. But clearly, with a minimal investment on the part of countries around the world, we can improve the fuel burn of every airplane flying by about 12%. And in terms of ETS, I think ETS will not do anything to reduce carbon emissions. In fact, I think it will prevent companies, airlines, from buying the modern equipment that will reduce their environmental footprint. So again, I think that we are adapting. I think we're listening to customers, and I think we also understand that the United States is not the only place that will be buying airplanes in the future. In fact, if one looks at the backlog that we have, about 85% of the 4,000 airplanes in our backlog are from outside of the 50 states.
And I guess I'll get harmony from across the other side of the Atlantic.
I'll try to say that through a different angle. If you were to look at the evolution of deliveries of commercial aircrafts combined, Boeing and ourselves, between 2006 and 2012, you wouldn't see any crisis. This means that we are not, maybe we did not do it on purpose, but we are not Atlantic-centric. We have been where the growth is, and the growth is in this region of the world and in Asia-Pacific. Crisis has been centered on the Atlantic, and we have not seen it. This does not mean that we have not been working hard to achieve that, but if you look just at the curve, no crisis has occurred in commercial aviation.
And I guess another aspect to this, it's often talked about, and it's obviously not a matter of whether, but just when. China, for example, will have its own adequate and competitive manufacturing industry that will start to make your lives difficult. I mean, we're not talking 10 years, we're probably talking 15 years, though. That's a reality. Boeing, Airbus?
Whether it's 10 or 15 doesn't change what we need to do. It is fair to see people willing to enter into this market, and our job. I speak for ourselves, but I guess Jim will share the view. Our job is to continue improving our offer, to stay ahead. The only way for us to make things continue as they are is not to stop other people, but to keep our edge. So we need to invest, we need to improve, we need to and listen to our customers to drive the improvement in the direction they are looking for.
Jim, do you have?
Well, I think that's correct. There's no question that Airbus made Boeing better. I think that Comac and Bombardier and others entering the marketplace will make us better. I share the view that we have to continue to invest in technology, and the reason people buy airplanes is because of the value in the product. And the value comes from technology, and the technology comes from R&D and investment. And you win because you have the best airplane at the right price. So clearly, investment in R&D, investment in people, and then taking cost out of the product. If we can do that, we'll be successful. If Airbus can do that, they'll be successful. If the new competitors can do it, they will be successful as well.
David, the issue for engines is a little bit different, I guess, that the technology is perhaps a little bit more sophisticated, and that therefore you're probably a little less vulnerable than the airframe manufacturers. Is that an adequate assessment?
Certainly the engine technology is very sophisticated, requires a huge investment to continue to progress the engine. But that's been and that's why you see only basically 3 people in the industry today that do large engines, ourselves, GE and Rolls-Royce, obviously. But again, I think we've continued to, as an industry, the 3 engine suppliers, and Akbar not to shamelessly promote Pratt Whitney again, it's true for GE and Rolls-Royce as well. There's a pattern in the industry of just introducing disruptive technology and then making incremental improvements on that technology. And that's been true since the Wright brothers first took off in the early part of last decade. You know, they couldn't get the airplane off the ground until they figured out how to replace the old cast iron engine head with aluminum cast engine. It was a big innovation. When Pratt introduced the Wasp engine in 1925 and the company started, it obsoleted water-cooled engine, and there was another wave of innovation. Same thing when Rolls started developing jet engines soon after World War II, and the introduction of the turbojet engine, and then following that, the introduction of another innovation of high bypass turbofan engines. And I think we're kind of on the verge of another wave of disruptive technology and innovation now, which is being driven by the spike in fuel costs and the need for airlines worldwide to kind of recapitalize to be able to deal with the higher fuel costs, as well as with the startup of new airlines like Qatar, who have new and spectacular, airplanes. The legacy carriers are having a tough time competing with that, and they're going to have to refresh their fleets. So I think it's again the thing that you can look at that I think gives you greatest comfort that this industry can deal with the challenges ahead of it is just to look at history. And again, it's not unique to Pratt. Our great competitors at Rolls-Royce and GE have demonstrated a similar history.
Akbar, will you be looking east for aircraft in the next 20 years?
Well, why not? If in the East they make aeroplanes that are safe, efficient, state-of-the-art, and meets our requirements, there is nothing wrong. You in USA are using everything that is made in the East, so why should we not? If it meets our requirement, of course we will.
And a little bit of competitive leverage doesn't do any harm, I guess.
Exactly.
Interesting, from Mubadala's point of view, obviously there are very close links now with Asia and China in particular. How do you see this investment trend evolving? I don't know if you know specifically in aviation, but it's something that obviously overflows into aviation.
Well, I think there is definitely investment opportunities for the Middle East in Asia and China and the likes of India. That's a fact. But let's take it back to the aviation industry. You know, Akbar said it right correctly, is if there is a platform that is safe, state-of-the-art technology, cost, right for us, I think that's where we will. But that's where I would challenge that value proposition, to be honest with you. I think Boeing and Airbus have the lead on that. 10, 15 years down the line, yes, China would probably produce an airplane. But would it be internationally recognized and accepted? I'm not sure about that. I actually have my doubts about it for a very simple fact, that there is a big lead within Boeing and Airbus. The technology that they're investing in and they're investigating right now are leaps and decades ahead of what exists today. And I think their model of investing into the countries where they're actually the market is, the strong market is, will create that loyalty, I think, in the future to say, if I'm buying a plane and X% of that plane is made in the region, in the country, why wouldn't I buy from the traditional OEMs? I think that's where we need to look at a wider value, selling process here than the typical, I have a platform, there is a requirement from Qatar or from Emirates or from Etihad, let's go and send the sales and marketing team. This has to be looked at a much more and bigger strategic direction from both of the OEMs. 10 to 15 years down the line is a long time for Boeing and Airbus to prepare for that war.
It is a big wave that's coming though, isn't it?
Definitely.
Massive change.
No doubt they will impact the industry. I have no doubt in my mind. But how significant is in that impact? I have my doubts about it.
And they are doing it very cleverly by letting both Boeing and Airbus invest in their country. And I'm sure this is a way of a learning process for them, so that there will be a gradual technology transfer, and they will invest in people, in human resources, to improve their products. And then, of course, they will compete with them at a better price, I'm sure.
And they do, of course, intend to be buying something like 300 aircraft a year, which is a big issue when it comes to foreign exchange, of course. So there's a real pressure for the Chinese to be building their own aircraft, isn't there?
Well, I think they will overcome. Don't underestimate them. They have already proven. You make your iPads there. So anyway, what is important to note that 10, 15 years is a long time. And with what's happening all around the world, I'm sure, and again, as Jim and Marwan said, that there will be so much pressure on the supply chain, that there will be a new supply chain that will then start in China, and that they will be able to compete on the world stage with quality and technology that is today available in the West.
That's a good point. That's probably a very valuable place to be, lower down the supply chain. We've seen what happened with the high-value minerals in China, for example. They can corner that market. If you can be a key part of the supply chain, I guess that's a very important way of getting to the source. Giuseppe, does Finmeccanica look to China, look to Asia?
Yes, I we are working there, we are manufacturing, we are looking at China, Russia, certainly, and those areas. I believe that, yes, there is the risk of the fact of IP transfer or for them to learn, but I also believe that, first of all, that you can't avoid it. Second, is that they are bringing a huge market. So I believe that by developing a local industry, also the total market will benefit, because we have seen everywhere in any country that when you have a local industry, the actual market grows. So it's true that there are 300, as Jim was saying, airplanes, but maybe if they are starting to produce themselves, they will become 500, 600, because there is nothing better than a local industry to increase the market. Second, I still believe that we need to keep an edge of technology. We are certainly, as we said, 10, 15 years, they are certainly behind in this moment. And if we continue to invest in technology, we can keep an edge, then they will start in the lower side of the value chain. And that is very important. That's why, by the same token, you have to consider that Chinese, Indian, they are really investing a lot in technology. They have the best kids in every university worldwide. They don't have limitation in investing funds. That is another significant point. But I believe that we still care, not only in the engines, but also in other activity, in other products. We can still keep a technology, a hedge of technology, a little difference, even though we can be sure that in 10, 15, 20 years, there may be much less difference. That's why it's important somehow also to joint venture, to contribute, because we may go together.
Okay, thank you. Now we've just got a few minutes left. What I might do, if I could, is just have a quick skip along the channel, along the panel. We have halfway through 2012, so 2020 is no longer as far away as it used to be, rapidly approaching, but it is nearly 8 years still. Just in one short idea, what is going to be, for each of you as suppliers and as operators and investors, what is going to be the one thing that you see will be very different in 2020 that affects your business? Maybe if I could start from the other end for a change, from Mubadala. Where are you going to be in 2020? What's the big issue for you?
Well, I think, continuing on our, delivering our strategy, creating the level of world-class partnership. We want to be a global player in this industry. We want to be one of the top 5 players in the key investment areas that we're investing in. And, we will achieve that with the partnerships model that we've had with GE, Boeing, Airbus, Finmeccanica, and we're going to continue on delivering that.
Yeah, I wonder if that's very much a global trend. The partnership thing is going to become not just an option, but an inevitable in many cases. Do you see any partners out there, Akbar?
Well,
Star Alliance.
It's a bit difficult for me to predict, because I don't know if I will be still around in 2020. However, with the pace of speed we are going.
Let's assume it.
But as far as we are concerned, I would not like to give you too much of our secrets for 2020. But one thing I can tell you, that Qatar Airways will be twice the size it is today. It will serve at least 2.5 times number of passengers we serve today. And we will be a global player. I have to be very careful, because I have my dear brother, His Highness Sheikh Ahmed, so I should not say too much of what I'm going to do in 2020.
Seriously though, I mean, talking disruption, I mean, the industry is constrained by, the airline industry is constrained heavily by regulatory primitivism, basically. It's an old, ugly system. Do you see in that time frame something dramatic happening to that structure which will help you as an airline?
Yes, I'm sure. There will be two things. You know, it is regulators are double-edged swords. First of all, I appreciate regulation because it is better for us and better for the traveling public, so that there is proper checks and balances in place. Unfortunately, regulators are going a bit overboard. But at the same time, I feel that technology will overcome all the difficulties that now the regulators are imposing upon us. And hopefully by then, there will be, of course, regulation, and it will always remain there, but there will be efficiencies that will be brought, which will then tip the balance towards us, that we are more and more safe and compliant due to the technology innovations during this period.
Good. David, 2020.
Well, I'll go out on a limb. This is an impressive gathering, but I would venture that by 2020 it'll be about twice the size that it is today.
Wow.
And he will start paying for the EADS because they are responsible for all the CO2 transmissions. We are only carrying passengers.
There you see the opportunities and challenges, David. Giuseppe, in 2020.
Well, I see a more focused Finmeccanica on a smaller range of activity, but certainly deeper. I will try to be a good OEM and a good supplier. But certainly we will develop a lot of collateral activity. I mean, this morning, let's talk about the cyber security. Let's talk about to make all our, what we do today, much more secure. This morning was mentioned a laser that can somehow take an airplane, and that is a series of activity that we have really to think to develop. So there will be a lot of technology passing from both the military or the more commercial into a different collateral world. I think at the smart cities, I mean, how to secure all the infrastructure and all of that. So we will develop a lot of that activity.
Thank you. Marwan.
Continue improving the delivery on our programs, globalize our presence. 97% of our staff today is Western European, and we would like to see this number going down to 80% in 2020. And last, increase the size and improve the dynamics of our defense and space activities. Our forecast is that we will be 80 billion euros revenues in 2020, and we would like to see 40% of that outside commercial aviation.
And Jim, last word for you.
When you think about the issues that we've discussed here this morning, you know, this industry has always had issues. And I think by 2020, the things that we have discussed, we will have addressed, and will be a much better industry as a result. I think from a Boeing perspective, I mean, by 2020, we'll have a whole new lineup of airplanes that are much more fuel efficient, much more environmentally friendly, much more responsive to the needs of our customers. But I think the biggest change that we'll see by 2020 is going to be in the airlines. If one looks at the pattern of consolidation that we've seen, you know, Iberia and British, you know, Continental and United, you know, Northwest and Delta, I think that's going to continue. And I think by 2020 we'll see, you know, a dozen or so very, very large and strong airlines that'll be able to drive great efficiency into their operation. And they're also going to be able to drive a lot of competition among the airframers and the engine companies. So to me, I think that'll be the biggest change that we'll see in 2020.
Interesting way to end. Yeah, I guess one of the things that the elephant in the corner for any of this sort of cooperation is the competition regulatory authorities, and who seem to be doing their damnedest at every step to prevent consolidation, if it's not through nationalism. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. We've had I think just a very quick glimpse into some of the extraordinarily complex issues that are facing this industry, the manufacturing industry and the airline industry. Backing up on what Tony was saying at the beginning, it's an industry that doesn't make money. It's an industry which is now confronting enormous change, which in turn requires enormous investment and a number of players taking risk. And it's somewhat encouraging to hear that there is a degree of optimism, a substantial degree of optimism among these OEMs that suggests that they will be prepared to take that risk. I just hope that the airline business will be able to make the necessary changes to become a whole lot more efficient, and that a lot of the ugly regulatory controls can be pushed out of the way and help that to happen. So if you'd care to thank our panel for a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. And thank you, and I'll hand back to our chairperson for the day. Thank you.